The courtroom lights blazed with an intensity that seemed to burn through the camera lenses, casting sharp shadows across Judge Judy Shandlin's face as she sat motionless at her bench, her fingers drumming a silent rhythm on a leather-bound book that would soon become the weapon of mass destruction in what reporters would later call the constitutional massacre of 2023. The air was electric, crackling with a tension so thick you could taste it. As Karen Mitchell stood at the plaintiff's podium, her designer blazer perfectly pressed, her highlighted hair cascading over shoulders that radiated the kind of confidence that comes from years of getting exactly what she wanted, exactly when she wanted it. She clutched a manila folder stuffed with papers she'd printed from internet legal forums, her manicured nails tapping against the podium's edge, her lips pursed in that particular expression of righteous indignation that had terrified countless retail managers and HOA board members. But what Karen didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have known as she prepared to launch her constitutional attack, was that hidden beneath Judge Judy's bench, marked with yellow sticky notes and highlighted passages, sat a document that would expose not just her ignorance, but something far more damaging, something that would make this case explode across every social media platform within hours. The gallery was packed beyond capacity. Spectators pressed shoulder to shoulder, their phones already recording despite the bailiff's warnings, sensing with that primal instinct that humans have for impending disaster, that they were about to witness something extraordinary. Judge Judy's eyes, sharp as broken glass behind her signature frames, swept across the courtroom with the practiced assessment of a woman who'd presided over more than 20,000 cases, who'd seen every con, every lie, every desperate attempt to manipulate the system, and who had absolutely zero patience left for people who confused Google searches with legal education. The defendant sat trembling, already vindicated by the energy in the room, while Karen stood tall, believing with every fiber of her entitled being that she was about to school a television judge on the United States Constitution, that she was about to become a viral hero for standing up to judicial tyranny. She had no idea she was about to become a cautionary tale, a meme, a lesson in what happens when confidence meets actual expertise. The cameras zoomed in as Judge Judy leaned forward, and Karen opened her mouth to speak the words that would seal her fate. Before we dive into this incredible case, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing where my viewers are around the world. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss more unbelievable cases like this one. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. Karen's voice cut through the courtroom like a siren, sharp and unwavering, carrying the kind of conviction that comes not from knowledge but from the dangerous certainty of someone who'd spent 3 hours on legal websites the night before. Your Honor, she began, her tone dripping with practiced condescension. Before we even begin to discuss the merits of this case, I need to address something far more serious. She paused for effect, letting her words hang in the air like a prosecutor about to reveal a smoking gun, her eyes scanning the gallery as if rallying support from an audience she believed was on her side. Judge Judy said nothing, her expression unreadable, her hand still resting on that mysterious leather-bound book, but her silence only emboldened Karen, who mistook patience for weakness, stillness for uncertainty. This entire proceeding, Karen continued, her voice rising with theatrical indignation, is unconstitutional. The word landed like a grenade in the middle of the courtroom, and the reaction was immediate. Gasps rippled through the gallery, spectators leaning forward in their seats, phones rising despite the bailiff's glare, camera operators adjusting their angles to capture what they sensed would be the money shot. The defendant's eyes went wide, his lawyer's pen freezing mid-note, and even the court reporter looked up from her machine, fingers hovering over the keys. Karen savored the moment, letting it breathe, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth as she surveyed the impact of her declaration. She'd practiced this, rehearsed it in front of her bathroom mirror, imagined the applause, the vindication, the interview requests that would surely follow. You see, Karen pressed on, her confidence swelling with each word. I've done my research, extensive research, and what I've discovered is that my constitutional rights are being violated in this courtroom. She waved her manila folder like a battle flag, papers rustling with the weight of her certainty. The Fifth Amendment protects me from being compelled to testify against myself. The Sixth Amendment guarantees me a trial by jury. The Seventh Amendment ensures my right to due process. And yet here I am, forced into this arbitration without any of those protections. Her voice had reached a crescendo, each amendment pronounced with the gravity of someone unveiling ancient secrets, her finger jabbing the air for emphasis. The gallery murmured, some nodding uncertainly, others exchanging skeptical glances, but Karen was on a roll now, unstoppable, intoxicated by her own rhetoric. The Founding Fathers, she declared, her hand pressed dramatically to her chest, wrote the Constitution to protect citizens like me from exactly this kind of judicial overreach. Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, Benjamin Franklin, they would be appalled at what's happening in this room right now. Judge Judy remained motionless, a statue carved from pure judicial authority, her face betraying nothing but those who knew her, the producers who'd worked with her for decades, the bailiff who'd stood by her side through thousands of cases. They recognized the signs, the slight narrowing of her eyes, the almost imperceptible tightening of her jaw, the way her fingers stopped their drumming and went completely still on that leather book. A storm was brewing, but Karen, blinded by her own performance, couldn't see the clouds gathering. "I have rights, Your Honor," Karen continued, pulling papers from her folder with flourish, holding them up as if they were sacred texts. "I've consulted with legal experts. I've read the case law, I've studied the precedents, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that forcing me into this arbitration, denying me a proper jury trial, refusing me the constitutional protections that every American deserves, this is nothing less than a violation of everything this country stands for." She slammed her folder down on the podium, the sharp crack echoing through the chamber like a gavel, her eyes blazing with righteous fury. "And quite frankly, Your Honor, I'm shocked that a court, even a television court, would allow such blatant constitutional violations to occur. It's illegal. It's unethical. It's un-American." The courtroom held its collective breath. The silence that followed Karen's tirade, so profound you could hear the hum of the overhead lights, the soft whir of the cameras, the rapid beating of hearts. Karen stood tall, chest heaving slightly from the exertion of her speech, arms crossed in a posture of defiant satisfaction, absolutely certain she'd just delivered a knockout blow. She'd said the magic words, invoked the sacred Constitution, challenged the very legitimacy of the proceedings. Surely now, Judge Judy would have to acknowledge the validity of her concerns, would have to dismiss the case, would have to admit that Karen had outmaneuvered her with superior legal knowledge. A few spectators actually nodded, swept up in the passion of her delivery, while others watched Judge Judy waiting, knowing that the real show was about to begin. Karen's smile widened slightly, interpreting the silence as victory, as vindication, as proof that even Judge Judy Sheindlin, the infamous television judge with her reputation for verbal destruction, had finally met her match in someone who knew the law, who understood the Constitution, who couldn't be intimidated or silenced. She had absolutely no idea that in the next 8 minutes, that smile would be wiped from her face, that her research would be exposed as worthless, and that the leather-bound book under Judge Judy's hand was about to become the instrument of her complete and utter humiliation. Judge Judy's hand moved with deliberate slowness, her fingers wrapping around the leather-bound book as she lifted it from the bench, the embossed gold lettering catching the courtroom lights, revealing what anyone paying attention could now see, was a pristine copy of the United States Constitution, its pages marked with colored tabs, its spine creased from years of actual use. Not the kind of prop you order online, but the kind of tool a real legal mind consults daily. The courtroom's energy shifted instantly, the air growing heavier, thicker, as Judge Judy opened the book to a page she didn't need to search for, her eyes scanning words she'd long ago committed to memory, and when she finally spoke, her voice was low, controlled, carrying the weight of 5 decades in courtrooms where constitutional law wasn't a talking point, but a living, breathing framework she'd sworn to uphold. "Ms. Mitchell," she began, and the formal use of Karen's last name sent a chill through the gallery. "I appreciate your passion, truly I do. But let me share something with you about this Constitution you're so fond of quoting." She held up the book, not theatrically, not for show, but with the reverence of someone who understood its actual significance. Article 3, Section 2 states, and I quote, "The judicial power shall extend to all cases, in law and equity, arising under this Constitution, the laws of the United States and treaties made or which shall be made, under their authority." Her voice was steady, each word enunciated with precision, and Karen's smile began to falter just slightly. "At the edges now," Judge Judy continued, closing the book but keeping her finger marking the page. "You mentioned the 5th, 6th, and 7th Amendments, so let's talk about what they actually say, not what you think they say." She leaned back in her chair, her posture radiating the confidence of someone who'd forgotten more about constitutional law than Karen had ever learned. "The 5th Amendment protects you from self-incrimination in criminal proceedings. This is a civil contract dispute. The 6th Amendment guarantees you a speedy trial by jury in criminal prosecutions. Again, civil case. The 7th Amendment preserves the right to a jury trial in common law cases exceeding $20 in value. But here's what you missed in your extensive research." Judge Judy's voice took on an edge now, sharp enough to cut through Karen's manufactured confidence. "When you signed the agreement to appear on this show, when you put your signature on that contract with the production company, you knowingly and voluntarily waived your right to a traditional civil trial and agreed to binding arbitration. That's not unconstitutional, Ms. Mitchell. That's called contract law. And it's been upheld by the Supreme Court repeatedly. most notably in AT&T Mobility versus Conception in 2011. The gallery erupted in whispers, spectators exchanging glances, some pulling out phones to Google the case Judge Judy had just cited, while Karen's face drained of color, her manila folder suddenly feeling very light, very inadequate in her trembling hands. Judge Judy wasn't done. Her eyes locked on Karen with the intensity of a prosecutor closing in for the kill. You want to talk about the Founding Fathers? Let's talk about them. Karen's face flushed crimson, a deep red that spread from her neck upward, visible even under the courtroom's harsh lighting. And instead of retreating, instead of accepting that she'd been outmaneuvered by someone who actually understood the law, she doubled down with the desperate ferocity of someone whose entire identity was wrapped up in never, ever being wrong. With all due respect, Your Honor, she said, the phrase dripping with anything but respect. I think you're deliberately misinterpreting what I'm saying, because you don't want to admit that this show operates outside the bounds of legitimate legal proceedings. The gallery gasped at the audacity, at the sheer recklessness of accusing Judge Judy Shendlin of deliberately misinterpreting the Constitution, and even the defendant's lawyer sat up straighter, sensing they were witnessing something rare, something spectacular, the kind of courtroom suicide that would be talked about for years. Karen yanked more papers from her folder, her hands shaking now not with nervousness but with indignant rage. I have articles here from constitutional scholars, real experts who explain how binding arbitration is actually a violation of our fundamental rights as Americans, how corporations use it to deny citizens their day in court, how it's a loophole that the Founding Fathers never intended. Her voice was rising again, louder now, more shrill, the desperation leaking through despite her attempts to sound authoritative. Judge Judy's expression hardened, the educational patience evaporating, replaced by something colder, more dangerous, the look of a woman who'd been insulted one too many times by people who confused confidence with competence. Ms. Mitchell, she said, her voice dropping to that deadly quiet register that anyone who'd watched her show knew meant someone was about to be annihilated. Let me be crystal clear with you. I was a family court judge in Manhattan for 25 years before I ever stepped foot in a television studio. I've presided over more than 20,000 cases. I've written books on the law. I've taught at law schools. And you're standing there with your Google printouts telling me I don't understand the Constitution. The words hung in the air like an executioner's blade, and Karen, sensing she was losing ground but unable to stop herself, made the fatal mistake of going personal. Maybe that's the problem, she snapped, her judgment completely abandoning her. Maybe all those years on a TV show have made you forget what real law looks like. This isn't justice, it's entertainment, and you're using your platform to deny people their constitutional rights while cameras roll. The courtroom exploded in murmurs, shocked gasps, and one voice from the gallery muttering, "Oh, she's done," loud enough for the microphones to catch. Judge Judy stood up, a rare move that sent a visible shockwave through the courtroom, her full height somehow seeming taller than her physical 5'1" frame, her presence expanding to fill every corner of the room. We're done playing games, she said quietly, reaching for something beneath her bench. Let me show you exactly what the Constitution says about people like you. Judge Judy pulled out a document from beneath her bench. Not the Constitution this time, but something else. Something that made Karen's eyes widen with sudden recognition and dawning horror. A single sheet of paper bearing Karen's own signature. The contract she'd signed with the show's production company. And Judge Judy held it up like a prosecutor presenting murder weapon evidence to a jury. This is your signature, correct, Ms. Mitchell? She asked, her voice carrying the precision of a scalpel. Karen nodded weakly, her bravado crumbling, and Judge Judy began reading aloud, her voice clear and unwavering. I hereby acknowledge that I am voluntarily submitting my case to binding arbitration presided over by Judge Judith Scheindlin, and I understand that her decision is final and legally binding, and I waive my right to pursue this matter in any other court or jurisdiction. She lowered the paper, her eyes boring into Karen with laser focus. You signed this 3 weeks ago. Your signature is notarized. You were given 72 hours to review it with an attorney if you chose. Did you read it, Ms. Mitchell? Karen's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, and Judge Judy pressed forward, opening the Constitution again to a page marked with a blue tab. Let me educate you on what the Founding Fathers actually intended, since you invoked their names. Article 1. Section 10 states that no state shall pass any law impairing the obligation of contracts. The Contracts Clause. You made an agreement. You signed a binding contract. The Constitution protects that contract, it doesn't void it because you're having buyer's remorse. The courtroom was absolutely silent now, every eye fixed on Judge Judy as she moved through the Constitution with surgical precision, her decades of experience evident in every word. The Seventh Amendment, which you love quoting, has been interpreted by the Supreme Court in cases like Shearson versus McMahon, Doctors Associates versus Casarato, and most recently Epic Systems versus Lewis, all of which upheld the validity of arbitration agreements. She wasn't reading from notes, wasn't checking references, the case names flowing from her memory like water from a tap, each citation a hammer blow to Karen's crumbling argument. You want to know what's unconstitutional, Ms. Mitchell? I'll tell you. What's unconstitutional is you wasting this court's time with frivolous arguments designed to avoid accountability for a contract dispute. You're going to lose on the merits. Judge Judy's voice rose now, not in anger but in the powerful crescendo of someone delivering an undeniable truth. The Founding Fathers created a system of law built on contracts, on agreements between parties, on personal responsibility. They didn't create a system where you get to sign documents and then cry, unconstitutional, when those documents don't work in your favor. She closed the Constitution with a definitive snap that echoed through the chamber. Your constitutional argument is denied. It's baseless, it's frivolous, and quite frankly, it's insulting to everyone who actually understands what this document represents. Now, shall we discuss the actual case, or would you like to continue embarrassing yourself? Karen stood frozen at the podium, her carefully constructed facade shattered into 1,000 pieces, her manila folder hanging limply in her hands. The papers that had seemed so authoritative just minutes ago now revealed as nothing more than worthless printouts from legal discussion, forums where anonymous users shared half-understood concepts they'd picked up from crime dramas. The gallery was electric with energy, spectators whispering furiously to one another, phones buzzing with texts and social media posts already going viral, hashtags forming in real time as the clip spread across Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, Reddit threads exploding with titles like, Judge Judy absolutely destroys Karen with constitutional knowledge, and never bring Google to a real judge fight. The defendant sat back in his chair, a smile of pure relief spreading across his face, knowing that whatever happened next, he'd already won simply by watching Karen's constitutional house of cards collapse under the weight of actual legal expertise. Judge Judy settled back into her seat, her expression softening slightly from prosecutorial intensity to something more educational, more measured, the look of a teacher who'd just delivered a harsh but necessary lesson to a student who'd grown too confident in their own ignorance. Let me explain something to everyone watching, Judge Judy said, addressing not just Karen but the cameras, the gallery, the millions who would eventually see this moment, because this is important and it goes far beyond this case. She paused, letting her words settle, her hands folded calmly on the bench. We live in an age where information is everywhere, where anyone can Google "is this unconstitutional?" and find 1,000 opinions, 1,000 interpretations, 1,000 people who sound very confident about things they don't actually understand. But the Constitution isn't a Wikipedia article. It's not a Reddit thread. It's not something you can master in a 3-hour late-night research session before you walk into a courtroom. The gallery nodded, some members leaning forward captivated by the shift from confrontation to education. The Constitution is a living framework that's been interpreted, debated, and refined by brilliant legal minds for over 200 years. Supreme Court justices spend their entire careers studying its nuances. Constitutional scholars dedicate decades to understanding a single amendment. And yes, ordinary citizens should know their rights, should understand the basics, should be informed and engaged. But there's a difference between being informed and pretending to be an expert. Judge Judy's eyes found Karen again, not with cruelty, but with something closer to pity. You could have walked in here today, presented your case on its actual merits, and we would have had a fair hearing. But instead you chose to hide behind constitutional buzzwords, to throw around amendments you don't understand, to waste everyone's time with legal theater. She gestured to the contract still sitting on her bench. And in doing so, you didn't just lose your case. You became a cautionary tale about what happens when ego outpaces knowledge, when confidence masquerades as competence, when someone mistakes the ability to sound smart for actually being smart. The courtroom had transformed from a battlefield into a classroom, the tension replaced by something deeper, more profound, the kind of collective understanding that comes when truth cuts through noise and everyone present recognizes they've witnessed not just a legal victory, but a cultural moment that transcends the case itself. Judge Judy leaned forward one final time, her voice carrying the weight of 50 years in the legal system, 50 years of fighting for justice, 50 years of watching people try to game a system designed to protect them. Here's what I want everyone to take away from this, she said, her words measured and deliberate, each syllable landing with purpose. The law isn't your enemy. The Constitution isn't a weapon you deploy when you don't like how things are going. These are frameworks, protections, guidelines that generations of Americans have fought and died to preserve. They deserve respect, not manipulation. They deserve understanding, not exploitation. Karen's shoulders sagged, the fight completely drained from her body, tears welling in her eyes as the full weight of her humiliation settled over her like a heavy blanket. Judge Judy's expression softened slightly, not with pity but with the firm compassion of someone who knew that sometimes the hardest lessons are the most valuable ones. You walked in here thinking you could outsmart the system, that you could use big words and constitutional references to avoid accountability for a contract you violated. Judge Judy continued, her tone gentler now but no less firm. But the truth always wins, Ms. Mitchell, always. Not because I'm sitting on this bench, but because that's how the law works when it's applied correctly, fairly, and by people who actually understand it. She picked up her gavel, holding it suspended for a moment that stretched like eternity. Judgment for the defendant. Case dismissed. And Ms. Mitchell, I strongly suggest you spend less time on legal websites and more time honoring the agreements you make. The gavel came down with a crack that reverberated through the chamber, final and absolute. And the courtroom erupted not in applause but in the rustling movement of people processing what they'd witnessed, phones already glowing with video uploads, news alerts beginning to ping across the nation. Within hours, law professors would be emailing the clip to their students, civics teachers would be adding it to their curricula, and millions of Americans would watch as Judge Judy Sheindlin demonstrated what real constitutional knowledge looks like when wielded by someone who dedicated their entire life to upholding it. The lesson was simple, powerful and undeniable. Respect the law, understand what you're talking about, and never, ever try to fake expertise in front of someone who's earned theirs through decades of hard work. Because the truth doesn't care about your confidence, it only cares about being true. A woman walked into Judge Judy's courtroom with a smirk on her face, convinced she could outsmart the system. 30 seconds later, she made a statement so shocking, so unbelievably arrogant that it stopped everyone cold. What she said next didn't just cost her the case. It exposed her in a way that millions of people would never forget. But here's what makes this story truly jaw-dropping. She actually believed the rules didn't apply to her. And Judge Judy? She was about to teach her the most expensive lesson of her life. Before we dive into this incredible case, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing where my viewers are around the world. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss more unbelievable cases like this one. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. The fluorescent lights of the Los Angeles courtroom hummed softly, casting a clinical glow over the polished wooden benches and the American flag standing sentinel in the corner. Judge Judy Sheindlin sat behind her elevated bench, her sharp eyes scanning the docket in front of her with the precision of a seasoned prosecutor. At 81, she was a force of nature, her silver hair perfectly styled, her black robe immaculate, and her expression one of controlled authority. This wasn't just a courtroom, it was her domain. And in her domain there were rules, sacred, unbreakable rules about truth, respect, and accountability. The bailiff stood near the door, his posture rigid, his face unreadable. The gallery was filled with spectators, some there to support the parties involved, others simply curious onlookers drawn by the promise of drama. The air carried a peculiar tension, the kind that settles over a room when everyone knows something significant is about to unfold. Cameras positioned strategically around the courtroom captured every angle, every expression, every movement. This wasn't just justice. This was justice with an audience. On one side of the room stood the plaintiff, a middle-aged man named Robert Chen. His hands were clasped in front of him, his shoulders slightly hunched as if carrying the weight of frustration and betrayal. He wore a simple button-down shirt and slacks, nothing flashy, nothing pretentious, just a man who wanted what he was owed. His eyes were tired but determined, the kind of tired that comes from months of trying to resolve something that should have been simple. He had documents tucked under his arm, receipts, text messages, emails, a paper trail that told a story he was desperate to share. And then there was Karen. She stood on the opposite side, and everything about her screamed defiance. Karen Mitchell was in her late 40s, dressed in a crisp white blazer over a pastel blouse, her blonde hair styled in loose waves that framed a face set in permanent irritation. Her arms were crossed, her weight shifted to one hip, and her lips were pressed into a thin line that suggested she found this entire proceeding beneath her. She didn't look nervous. She didn't look apologetic. She looked annoyed, as if being summoned to court was an inconvenience she hadn't deserved. Her eyes darted around the room with a mix of boredom and barely concealed contempt. She checked her phone once, scrolling casually before the bailiff shot her a look that made her slide it back into her purse with an exaggerated sigh. Judge Judy glanced up from her notes, her gaze landing on Karen with the intensity of a hawk-spotting movement in tall grass. She had seen thousands of people stand where Karen stood. Some were genuinely wronged. Some were confused. Some were remorseful. And some, like Karen, walked in thinking they were cleverer than everyone else in the room. Judge Judy could always tell the difference. It was in the posture, the micro-expressions, the way they held themselves. Karen wasn't here to make things right. She was here because she had to be, and that was her first mistake. This is case number 4721, Chen versus Mitchell. Judge Judy began, her voice clear and commanding. cutting through the low murmur of the gallery. Mr. Chen is suing Ms. Mitchell for $4,200, the cost of repairs to his vehicle after an accident, plus additional expenses for a rental car. She paused, letting the details settle. Ms. Mitchell claims she doesn't owe him a dime. Her eyes locked onto Karen. Is that correct, Ms. Mitchell? Karen uncrossed her arms, tilting her head slightly as if the question itself was ridiculous. That's correct, Your Honor, she said, her tone dripping with casual dismissiveness. This whole thing is blown way out of proportion. Judge Judy's pen tapped once against her notepad. Just once, but it was enough. That single tap was a warning, a signal to anyone paying attention that the judge had already started taking notes. Not just on the facts, but on the attitude. Robert shifted his weight, his jaw tightening. He had been waiting for this moment for months, and hearing Karen's flippant response reignited the frustration he'd been carrying. Judge Judy glanced at him briefly, a silent acknowledgement that she saw him, that she understood. Then her attention returned to Karen, steady and unblinking. Blown out of proportion, Judge Judy repeated, her voice flat. We'll see about that. She gestured to Robert. Mr. Chen, tell me what happened. What Karen didn't realize, what she couldn't possibly have understood as she stood there with her arms crossed, and her attitude on full display, was that she had just walked into something far bigger than a small claims case. She had walked into a reckoning. And the woman sitting behind that bench? She had spent decades dismantling lies, exposing arrogance, and delivering justice to people who thought they could talk their way out of accountability. Karen thought this was just another annoying formality. Judge Judy knew it was about to become a masterclass. Before we dive into what happened next, and trust me, you're going to want to see every second of this, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because what Judge Judy does to Karen in the next few minutes is something you'll want to watch again and again. Don't miss it. Robert Chen cleared his throat, stepping forward slightly as all eyes in the courtroom turned to him. He wasn't a man comfortable with attention, that much was obvious. His hands trembled slightly as he unfolded a piece of paper, smoothing it against his thigh before looking up at Judge Judy. Your Honor, he began, his voice steady but soft. 6 months ago, Ms. Mitchell ran a red light and hit my car, totaled the front end. I had witnesses, I had the police report, everything showed she was at fault. Judge Judy nodded, her fingers steepled in front of her. And her insurance? Robert's face tightened, the frustration bubbling just beneath the surface. That's the problem, Your Honor. She gave me false insurance information. The policy number she wrote down? It didn't exist. When I tried to follow up, the company had no record of her. I've been trying to get her to pay for 6 months. 6 months of phone calls, texts, emails. She kept making excuses, saying she'd pay me next week, then the week after. Finally, I gave up and came here. Judge Judy's gaze shifted to Karen, who was now inspecting her nails as if the conversation happening 3 feet away from her was background noise. Ms. Mitchell, is what Mr. Chen said true? Did you give him false insurance information? Karen looked up slowly, her expression one of theatrical innocence. I gave him the information I had, Your Honor. If it was wrong, that's not my fault. Maybe I copied it down wrong. It was a stressful situation. She shrugged, the gesture so casual it bordered on mocking. And honestly, his car wasn't even that damaged. He's acting like I destroyed a brand new Mercedes. It was a 2008 Honda Civic. The courtroom fell silent. Robert's hands clenched into fists at his sides, his jaw working as he fought to keep his composure. Judge Judy leaned back in her chair, her eyes narrowing. So your defense is that his car was old, so the damage doesn't matter? I'm just saying he's exaggerating, Karen replied, her tone light, almost sing-song. $4,000? For a dent and a broken headlight? Come on. Judge Judy picked up a photograph from the stack of evidence in front of her. She held it up, angling it so the cameras in the gallery could see. The image showed Robert's Honda Civic, its entire front end crumpled like an accordion. The hood buckled, the bumper hanging by a thread, shattered glass littering the asphalt. This, Judge Judy said, her voice cold and sharp, is a dent and a broken headlight? Karen glanced at the photo, her expression flickering for just a moment before she recovered. Well, I mean, it looks worse in pictures. Judge Judy set the photo down slowly, deliberately, her eyes never leaving Karen's face. It looks worse in pictures, she repeated, her tone laced with disbelief. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the bench. Ms. Mitchell, do you think I was born yesterday? Karen blinked, caught off guard. I'm sorry? I asked, Judge Judy said, enunciating each word with surgical precision. If you think I was born yesterday, because the way you're standing there telling me that this, she tapped the photograph, is exaggerated? That takes a special kind of audacity. Karen's confident facade cracked for just a second, before she plastered on a tight smile. Your Honor, I'm just trying to explain my side. Mr. Chen is making this sound worse than it was. Judge Judy held up a hand, silencing her. Let me ask you something very simple. Were you driving the car that hit Mr. Chen's vehicle? Yes, but... Yes or no, Ms. Mitchell? Karen's lips pressed together. Yes. And did you run the red light? I don't think I did. The light was yellow when I entered the intersection. Judge Judy's eyebrows shot up. She reached for another document, her reading glasses perched on her nose. The police report says 3 witnesses, including a traffic camera, confirmed the light was red for a full 2 seconds before you entered the intersection. She looked up. So either 3 people and a camera are lying or you are. Which is it? Karen shifted her weight, her arms crossing again defensively. Maybe they didn't see it right. It all happened so fast. 3 witnesses and a camera didn't see it right, Judge Judy repeated, her voice dripping with skepticism. She turned to Robert. Mr. Chen, do you have the police report with you? Robert nodded quickly, pulling a folder from under his arm. He handed it to the bailiff, who passed it to Judge Judy. She flipped through it, her eyes scanning the typed paragraphs with the speed of someone who'd read thousands of similar documents. Officer Martinez arrived on scene at 3:47 p.m. Witness 1, Maria Gonzalez, stated she saw the defendant's vehicle, a silver Toyota Camry, run the red light at high speed. Witness 2, David Park, confirmed the same. Traffic camera footage corroborates. Judge Judy looked up. Ms. Mitchell, did you even read this report? I glanced at it, Karen said dismissively. But those witnesses were probably friends of his or something. The gallery gasped. Robert's mouth fell open. Even the bailiff's eyebrows lifted slightly. Judge Judy removed her glasses slowly, setting them down on the bench. Friends of his? Maria Gonzalez was a 68-year-old woman walking her dog. David Park was a delivery driver. Neither of them had ever met Mr. Chen before that day. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a dangerous calm. Are you suggesting they committed perjury to help a complete stranger? Karen realized she'd stepped in it. I'm not saying that, I don't know, maybe they were mistaken. Mistaken? 3 people. And a camera. Judge Judy's pen tapped twice this time. Let's move on. Mr. Chen, you said Ms. Mitchell gave you insurance information. Do you have proof of that? Robert nodded eagerly, pulling out his phone. I took a picture of the paper she gave me right there at the scene. He handed his phone to the bailiff. Judge Judy examined the screen, her expression darkening. She looked at Karen. This policy number doesn't exist. I called the insurance company myself before this hearing. They have no record of you ever being a customer. Karen's face flushed. That's impossible. I had insurance. Then why doesn't this number work? Maybe I wrote it down wrong in the moment. I was shaken up. Judge Judy's voice turned to ice. You were shaken up, but Mr. Chen, whose car you just destroyed, wasn't. Karen's face was reddening now, her composure slipping with each passing second. She uncrossed her arms, then crossed them again, shifting from foot to foot like a boxer trying to find an opening that didn't exist. Judge Judy wasn't giving her one. Ms. Mitchell, let me make sure I understand your story. You ran a yellow light, not a red one. Even though 3 witnesses and a camera say otherwise, you gave correct insurance information, but somehow the policy doesn't exist. And Mr. Chen's car, which looks like it went through a trash compactor, only has a dent and a broken headlight. Do I have that right? When you say it like that, it sounds bad. Karen protested, her voice rising slightly. It sounds bad because it is bad. Judge Judy shot back. Now let's talk about the 6 months after the accident. Mr. Chen says he tried repeatedly to contact you about payment. What's your response to that? Karen waved a hand dismissively. He texted me a few times, sure. But he was being unreasonable about the amount. I told him I'd pay him something, but not $4,000. That's ridiculous. Judge Judy picked up another document. Mr. Chen has provided a complete record of your text conversations. 63 messages over 6 months. In these messages, you promised payment 11 different times. 11 times you gave him a specific date. And 11 times you failed to pay. She looked up, her eyes boring into Karen. That's not being unreasonable. That's being lied to. Repeatedly. I had financial issues, Karen said quickly. I was going to pay him when I could. Then why did you tell him on March 15th that the check was in the mail? And on April 3rd that you'd pay him that Friday? And on May 20th that your insurance was handling it? Judge Judy's voice rose with each question. Were those lies, or were you just confused 11 separate times? Karen's mouth opened and closed. She looked around the courtroom as if searching for an exit, a lifeline, anything. The spectators watched in rapt silence. Robert stood perfectly still, his eyes locked on Karen, watching her squirm. This was the moment he'd been waiting for. 6 months of frustration, of being dismissed and disrespected, and finally, someone was holding her accountable. I was trying to figure things out, Karen said weakly. I didn't mean to mislead him. Judge Judy leaned back in her chair, her expression one of barely controlled disgust. Ms. Mitchell, I've been doing this for 28 years. I've seen every excuse, every deflection, every attempt to avoid responsibility. And you know what I've learned? Liars always have one thing in common. They can never keep their story straight. She paused, letting the words hang in the air. So I'm going to ask you one more time, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer. Did you or did you not give Mr. Chen false insurance information intentionally? The courtroom held its breath. Karen's eyes darted to the exit, to the cameras, to Robert, and finally back to Judge Judy. And then, in a moment of staggering arrogance that would be replayed millions of times, she shrugged. Look, I might have fudged some details, but it's not like I'm under oath or anything. The silence that followed was deafening. Judge Judy's face transformed. The controlled authority gave way to something far more dangerous. Pure, undiluted disbelief mixed with fury. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. She blinked once, twice, as if she couldn't quite believe what she'd just heard. The pen in her hand stopped mid-tap, frozen in the air. The entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Every person leaning forward, waiting for the explosion they knew was coming. Excuse me? Judge Judy's voice was barely above a whisper, but it cut through the silence like a blade. What did you just say? Karen, still oblivious to the magnitude of her mistake, shrugged again. I just meant that I wasn't trying to lie, I was just… Stop talking. Judge Judy's hand shot up, palm out. Stop talking. She stood up from her chair, something she rarely did, and the movement sent a ripple of shock through the gallery. She leaned forward, both hands planted on the bench, her eyes locked on Karen with an intensity that could melt steel. Did you just tell me that you're not under oath? Karen's face finally registered fear. Real fear. Her eyes widened and she took a half step back. I didn't mean… When you walked into this courtroom, Judge Judy continued, her voice rising with each word. You raised your right hand. Do you remember that? You raised your right hand and you swore to tell the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth. So help you God. Do you remember doing that? Karen nodded mutely, her face draining of color. That means you are under oath. Judge Judy's voice thundered through the courtroom. You have been under oath from the moment you walked through that door. Every word out of your mouth has been under oath. And you just admitted on the record that you've been lying. She pointed at Karen, her finger trembling with rage. Do you understand what perjury is, Ms. Mitchell? I wasn't trying to… Karen stammered, her previous confidence completely evaporated. Perjury is a crime. Judge Judy continued, not giving her an inch. It means lying under oath in a court proceeding. It can result in fines, jail time, and a permanent criminal record. And you just confessed to it on camera in front of witnesses because you were too arrogant to realize that rules apply to you. Karen's hands were shaking now. She looked like she might cry or faint or both. Your Honor, please, I didn't understand. You didn't understand. Judge Judy's laugh was sharp and bitter. You understood perfectly well. You understood when you gave Mr. Chen fake insurance information. You understood when you lied to him 11 times about payment. You understood when you walked in here and lied about the red light, about the damage, about everything. She sat back down slowly, deliberately, her eyes never leaving Karen's face. What you didn't understand is that actions have consequences, that you can't just smile and shrug your way out of responsibility. The bailiff shifted slightly, his hand moving closer to Karen as if expecting her to bolt. Robert stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, watching the systematic destruction of the woman who'd made his life miserable for 6 months. Judge Judy opened the folder in front of her, flipping through the pages with methodical precision. Each turn of a page felt like a nail being driven into Karen's coffin. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the rustle of paper, the soft hum of the cameras, the barely audible breathing of dozens of spectators holding their collective breath. Karen stood motionless, her arms wrapped around herself now, no longer defensive but protective, like a child bracing for punishment. Let me walk through what we have here, Judge Judy began, her voice returning to its calm, measured tone, which somehow felt more threatening than the yelling. We have a police report confirming you ran a red light. We have 3 independent witnesses. We have traffic camera footage. We have photographs showing extensive damage to Mr. Chen's vehicle. We have a fake insurance policy number that you claim was an accident, despite the fact that you clearly wrote it down carefully enough for Mr. Chen to photograph it. We have 63 text messages showing a pattern of deception and broken promises. And we have your own admission moments ago that you fudged some details because you thought you weren't under oath. She looked up, her gaze pinning Karen in place. Ms. Mitchell, in 28 years on this bench, I have seen some brazen displays of entitlement and dishonesty. But you've managed to distinguish yourself. Congratulations. Karen's lip quivered. Your Honor, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to… Save it. Judge Judy cut her off with a wave of her hand. I don't want your apology. Apologies are for people who are genuinely remorseful. You're not remorseful. You're just sorry you got caught. She picked up her pen, making a note on her pad. Here's what's going to happen. Judgment for the plaintiff, Mr. Chen, in the amount of $4,200 for vehicle repairs and rental car expenses. Robert exhaled, his shoulders sagging with relief. 6 months of fighting, 6 months of being dismissed and lied to, and finally, vindication. But Judge Judy wasn't finished. Additionally, she continued, her voice hardening, I'm adding another $800 in court costs, which you will also pay. That brings your total to $5,000. And let me be crystal clear, Ms. Mitchell, you will pay this. Not next week, not next month, not when it's convenient for you. The show will ensure Mr. Chen receives his money, and then we will come after you for reimbursement. If you fail to pay, we will pursue every legal avenue available, including wage garnishment and liens against any property you own. Karen's face crumpled. $5,000. I don't have that kind of money. Judge Judy's expression didn't change. Then you shouldn't have lied, cheated, and committed perjury in my courtroom. You made your choices. Now you live with them. She raised her gavel. We're done here. Judgment for the plaintiff. Get out of my courtroom. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that echoed like a gunshot. Karen stood frozen for a moment, stunned, before the bailiff gestured toward the exit. She walked toward the door, her heels clicking against the floor, each step a walk of shame past dozens of eyes watching her defeat. Robert Chen walked out of that courtroom with more than just a judgment in his favor. He walked out with his dignity restored, with proof that persistence and truth still matter in a world that sometimes feels designed to reward those who lie the loudest. For 6 months, he'd been gaslit, dismissed, and disrespected by someone who believed rules were suggestions for other people. And in less than 15 minutes, Judge Judy had dismantled that illusion completely. For those watching this story unfold, the lesson is devastatingly clear. Karen's downfall wasn't just about a car accident or unpaid damages. It was about something far more dangerous, the belief that accountability is optional. She walked into that courtroom thinking she could charm, deflect, and manipulate her way out of consequences. She thought that if she just acted confident enough, annoyed enough, inconvenienced enough, she could rewrite reality to suit her narrative. But here's the truth that Karen learned the hard way. Integrity isn't situational. You don't get to pick and choose when honesty matters. The oath you take in a courtroom isn't a formality. It's a sacred promise that truth will be your currency, and when you treat that promise like it's negotiable, you don't just lose the case. You lose something far more valuable. Your credibility, your character, your reputation. Judge Judy represents something our society desperately needs more of: uncompromising accountability. She doesn't care about your excuses, your social status, or how inconvenienced you feel. She cares about facts, evidence, and truth. In her courtroom, as in life, you can't smile your way past responsibility. You can't shrug off consequences. You can't rewrite history just because the truth is uncomfortable. Karen thought she was smarter than everyone in that room. She learned she wasn't even close. And that lesson, delivered with the force of a judge's gavel and witnessed by millions, serves as a reminder. The truth doesn't need multiple versions. It doesn't need rehearsals or adjustments. It simply is. If this story reminded you that actions have consequences and truth still matters, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another moment of justice being served. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment telling me about a time you witnessed someone get exactly what they deserved. And remember, whether you're in a courtroom or just living your daily life, integrity isn't about being under oath. It's about being the kind of person who tells the truth even when no one's watching, because eventually someone always is. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. The courtroom lights were too bright for Karen's comfort, and maybe that's why her lies began to melt. From the moment she stepped inside, she'd been performing. A woman wronged, misunderstood, and ready to play victim in front of millions. But what she didn't know was that every single second of her arrogance was already captured. The cameras she accused of bias had become silent witnesses, holding a truth she could never control. Before we dive into this incredible case, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing where my viewers are around the world. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss more unbelievable cases like this one. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. The episode was supposed to be routine, one more televised case about an unpaid debt and a broken friendship. But the energy in that room was different. Even the audience could feel it. Karen's voice carried that entitled tone, the one that fills a room and leaves no space for truth. When the judge tried to bring order, she snapped back, pointing at the crew. They're making me look bad. These people are editing against me. Her words cracked through the courtroom, sharp and desperate. The crowd stirred. The judge's expression didn't change, but the silence that followed was heavier than the gavel. She thought calling out the crew would shift sympathy her way, that she could twist the lens to her favor. What she didn't realize, what no one in that moment fully understood, was that the footage she was accusing of being biased would soon expose something much darker. The truth wasn't just recorded, it was waiting to be revealed in front of the very audience she tried to deceive. There was something almost poetic about it. The same cameras she called her enemies would become her undoing. But that twist, that devastating reveal hadn't come yet. And when it did, it wouldn't just destroy her story. It would destroy the image she'd spent her whole life building. Before we go further, tell me something. Do you think people like Karen, who twist the truth and blame others for their downfall, ever deserve a second chance? Comment below and let me know what you believe, because after you see what happens next, your answer might change forever. The air in the courtroom felt like glass, fragile, ready to shatter with one more word from her mouth. Karen sat rigid in her chair, one leg crossed over the other, eyes darting to every corner where the cameras were perched. Her confidence had begun to crack, but she wasn't done performing. She lifted her chin, gesturing dramatically toward the camera crew. You people are twisting everything I say. I came here for justice, not humiliation. Her words echoed, not because they carried truth, but because they dripped with the same venom that had turned her into a spectacle. The judge stayed silent for a long moment, watching her with that unreadable calm that made even the boldest crumble. Finally, he leaned forward, his voice low but steady. Mrs. Carter, the only one humiliating you right now is yourself, the audience murmured. A few people in the back even chuckled quietly. Karen's face stiffened. Embarrassment crept up her neck like a slow fire. She turned sharply toward the plaintiff, a quiet woman in her 30s who hadn't said much since the hearing began. The plaintiff looked down, almost pitying Karen, which only made her angrier. Karen slammed her hand on the table. They're making me look like the bad guy, she hissed. You people don't know what it's like to have everyone against you. Her voice trembled, not with pain, but with fury. Every word was another nail in her own coffin. The judge raised a hand, signaling her to stop. That's enough, he said. But Karen couldn't. She leaned forward, pointing again at the cameras. Those cameras are biased. They're cutting my answers. They're showing me wrong on purpose. The bailiff's posture tightened. The crew behind the lenses exchanged uneasy glances. They'd heard accusations before, but never like this, never so desperate, so unhinged. One of the cameramen muttered under his breath, We're live, lady. There's no cutting anything. The words slipped out, caught by a nearby mic. The audience gasped softly. Karen froze. The judge's eyes narrowed. You heard him, he said quietly. There's no editing. What the audience sees is exactly what you said. For a second, the room went completely still. Even Karen didn't breathe. But pride wouldn't let her back down. She crossed her arms, sneering. Oh, please. You're all working together. You want me to look bad because I don't play your game. Her tone dripped with contempt. She wasn't just fighting to win the case anymore. She was fighting to protect the illusion of being right. The plaintiff finally lifted her gaze, her voice trembling but clear. I don't think anyone has to make you look bad, Karen. You're doing that on your own. The room erupted in whispers. A few audience members clapped quietly before the bailiff motioned for silence. Karen's face turned red, her jaw clenching so tight it looked painful. The judge leaned back in his chair, his patience thinning. Mrs. Carter, you've accused the plaintiff, the production, and now the crew. Is there anyone left in this courtroom you haven't blamed yet? His voice carried the kind of weight that silences even the loudest. Karen opened her mouth but found no words. For the first time, her expression flickered. Not anger, not arrogance, but fear. She sat back slowly, fidgeting with her bracelet, her eyes darting toward the cameras again. She was starting to realize the cameras weren't her enemy. They were her mirror. And mirrors don't lie, but even then she didn't know the worst part. The footage she was accusing of bias had already started circulating online. Someone from the crew had leaked a short clip of her earlier outburst, unedited. Within minutes, comments flooded social media. This woman is unreal. Classic gaslighting behavior. Cameras biased? Lady, you're the one performing. The audience didn't know yet. The judge didn't know yet. But outside, the world was already watching. The narrative she thought she controlled was slipping through her fingers. She tried to recover, smoothing her dress, flashing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I just think it's unfair, she said, her tone shifting into feigned innocence. Everyone's against me and nobody wants to hear my side. The judge exhaled slowly. Then maybe you should start telling the truth. Her smile faltered. Somewhere deep down she could feel it, the unraveling. Every word she spoke was being measured. Every glance recorded, every lie silently time-stamped for the world to see later. The very thing she tried to weaponize was turning against her. As the plaintiff presented her final documents, proof of payment, text messages and receipts, Karen tried to interrupt again, but the judge raised his gavel. You'll have your turn, Mrs. Carter. His tone was colder now, sharper. The power dynamic had shifted, and everyone in the room could feel it. Karen wasn't the victim anymore. She was the storm everyone had learned to watch from a safe distance. By the end of that session, The audience wasn't whispering about the money anymore. They were whispering about her. About the way she blamed everyone but herself. About the way she crumbled when the cameras didn't protect her image. And as the court went into recess, the cameras kept rolling, still capturing everything. The nervous twitch in her hand, the crack in her voice. The first tiny fracture in the persona she'd spent her life performing. She didn't know it yet. But the moment she walked out that door, her story was already out of her control. The next day, the courtroom returned to its quiet hum, but the air was charged with something new. Anticipation. The previous hearing had gone viral overnight. Millions of viewers had already seen Karen's tirade online, dissecting every word and gesture. Memes, reactions, and commentary filled social media feeds. Karen didn't know it yet, but her reputation had already become a national talking point. And as she entered the room, shoulders stiff, sunglasses hiding her swollen eyes, everyone was watching. The judge took his seat, tapping the gavel once. Before we proceed, I've been made aware that yesterday's footage has circulated beyond this courtroom. While unfortunate, this means one thing. Transparency is no longer optional. The crew nodded from behind their cameras, their lenses glinting like truth itself. Karen's lawyer shifted uneasily beside her. She sat with forced poise, hands clasped too tightly in her lap. Her face betrayed a flicker of fear, the kind that creeps in when someone realizes the story isn't theirs anymore. The judge turned toward the production team. Play the segment from yesterday, the part in question. A large screen on the side wall lit up. The audience leaned forward. The footage began to roll, unedited and raw. Karen's voice echoed through the speakers. They're cutting my answers. They're making me look bad, followed by her shouting at the crew, accusing them of bias. Then the moment of silence. The cameraman's voice calmly stating, "We're live, lady. There's no cutting anything." The courtroom watched in absolute stillness. Karen's breathing quickened. Her lips parted as if to speak, but the judge raised his hand. "No interruptions." The footage continued, showing her smirking at the plaintiff, rolling her eyes and whispering to her lawyer, "She's so fake, I'll destroy her." The room reacted as though struck by lightning. Gasps rippled through the rows. Karen gripped the table edge, nails biting into the wood. Her lawyer whispered for her to stay silent, but her composure was already slipping. When the clip ended, the judge leaned forward. "Mrs. Carter, this footage was recorded in real time. No edits, no cuts, no bias. These are your words, your actions." His tone carried both disappointment and finality. "Would you still like to claim that the crew manipulated you?" Karen's mouth opened, but no sound came. The mask she had worn for so long was cracking under the weight of truth. She tried to summon outrage, but her voice trembled. I was emotional. They provoked me." The judge nodded slowly. "Perhaps. But emotion doesn't erase evidence." In that moment, the audience understood what she didn't. This wasn't about production bias or editing. This was about accountability. And as the camera zoomed in on her trembling hands, Karen realized the irony. The lens she blamed for her downfall had never once looked away. Karen's silence after the footage ended wasn't peace. It was pressure. The kind that builds behind a dam seconds before it breaks. The courtroom waited. Cameras stayed fixed on her, their red lights blinking like warnings. She forced a tight laugh as if the whole thing were a misunderstanding. "You're showing the worst parts," she muttered, her voice trembling. "You're twisting it to make me look bad." The judge leaned forward, hands folded. "Mrs. Carter, that footage was unedited. Would you like us to show the rest?" Her face went pale. She shook her head quickly, but the judge wasn't asking for permission. "Play the rest," he said to the crew. The audience shifted, whispers rising like wind through dry leaves. The second clip began. Karen, before the hearing off camera, berating a staff member for not bringing her bottled water fast enough. I said, chilled. "Do you even know who I am?" she barked. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Even her lawyer dropped his gaze, knowing there was no defense for arrogance that loud. When the clip ended, Karen's image froze on screen, mouth twisted in contempt, eyes narrowed with entitlement. The judge's voice cut through the silence. "That's not bias, Mrs. Carter. That's who you chose to be when you thought no one was watching." Karen's hand shot up, trembling. "I didn't mean—" Her words trailed off when the audience's low murmurs turned into judgment. Phones buzzed across the room as people recorded live reactions. Outside the courthouse, more cameras waited. Reporters had gathered, drawn by the viral storm she'd created. Every moment she spent trying to defend herself was being captured again. Every tear, every denial, every crack in her act. Her lawyer leaned in, whispering urgently. "Stop talking." Every word digs deeper. But Karen couldn't stop. She turned toward the audience, trying to appeal directly to them. "You don't understand. They wanted to humiliate me. Enough!" The judge's voice thundered, striking through her spiral. This is not a stage, and you are not a victim of bias. You are accountable for your behavior. The cameras didn't create your actions, they preserved them. His words were calm but final, and they hit harder than any shout could have. For a long, uneasy minute, no one moved. Even the crew members seemed frozen behind their lenses. Then the judge turned to the production team again. "Keep that footage secure," he ordered. "The network will decide what airs, but truth will not be hidden in this courtroom." Karen sat back slowly, her eyes glassy, her breathing shallow. She wasn't crying yet. She was calculating. The arrogance was gone, but in its place was fear, the realization that her reputation had gone from controlled image to open evidence. The power she once had over perception had slipped away. The cameras didn't lie, and now for the first time everyone could see her exactly as she was. The tension in the room thickened, signaling what was coming next, the breaking point that no one, not even Karen, could stop. The room felt like it was holding its breath. Every light, every camera, every heartbeat waited for what would happen next. Karen sat stiffly at the defendant's table, pretending calm, but her hands were trembling. She'd been cornered, but denial was the only weapon she had left. "You've twisted everything," she blurted out, her voice cracking. "You're all in on it, the judge, the cameras, the audience." "You want to destroy me?" The judge didn't reply immediately. His eyes lingered on her, studying the collapse of her performance. "Mrs. Carter," he said finally, "truth doesn't destroy people. Lies do." His voice was calm, but the weight in it silenced the room. "You claim bias. You claim editing. So let's remove every doubt. Crew, roll the uncut surveillance footage." Every camera shifted at once. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly as a larger monitor flickered to life. Unlike the crisp broadcast footage, this video was raw, grainy, time-stamped, and impossible to manipulate. It showed Karen before the hearing began, pacing in the waiting area. She was laughing with someone on the phone, her tone smug and cruel. "Oh, I'll win. I always win. I'll play the poor victim and make that woman look like a liar. You'll see, it's easy when you know how to talk." The sound hit the courtroom like a strike of thunder. The audience gasped in unison. Karen's lawyer went pale, his pen slipping from his hand. The judge's expression hardened. He didn't need to say anything. The footage was speaking louder than words ever could. The video continued. Karen, moments later, scoffing at the crew, muttering that she'd charm the judge if things went bad. The raw footage captured every smirk, every arrogant whisper, every manipulation she thought would stay unseen. When it ended, the silence was unbearable. It wasn't the silence of suspense anymore. It was the silence of truth. The kind that crushes everything false beneath it. Karen's breath hitched. She tried to speak, but only managed to whisper. That's not fair." The judge tilted his head slightly. "Fairness," he said, "was what you demanded. Now you have it." Her face twisted, rage, disbelief, humiliation, all colliding at once. "You can't show that. It's private. It's the truth," the judge interrupted, his tone sharper now. "And in this courtroom, truth is not optional." Karen buried her face in her hands. The audience watched, not with cruelty, but with something closer to pity. Her lies had collapsed so completely that even her anger couldn't find purchase anymore. Then came the final blow. The judge turned to the crew again. "Play the footage from camera 3, the one from the plaintiff's table." Karen lifted her head, confusion flashing across her face. The screen changed again, showing the earlier confrontation from a side angle, one no one had seen yet. It revealed something that stunned the courtroom. Karen mocking the plaintiff's disability under her breath when she thought no one was listening. Her lips moved clearly enough that the entire room could read the words. Gasps erupted, followed by a single, trembling voice from the audience. "Oh my God!" The judge's gavel struck once. Order. But even he couldn't calm the storm that had broken. Karen's reputation didn't just falter, it imploded. Her expression collapsed into panic. "That's not what I meant. I was joking," she pleaded, her voice shrill. The judge stared at her for a long, silent moment, then said, "Jokes reveal character, and yours has spoken loudly enough." Karen slumped back in her chair, her entire act dissolving. Her lawyer tried to whisper something, but she waved him off. The realization had finally sunk in. Her truth wasn't hidden in some biased edit. It was exposed by her own words, her own actions. The cameras zoomed in slowly as she sat motionless, the once defiant woman now small and trembling under the weight of her own lies. The footage looped once more on the monitor. Karen's smirk, her arrogance, her cruelty, and beside it, the real her, broken, speechless, stripped of the illusion of innocence. The judge rose from his chair. "The court will adjourn for 10 minutes, he said. His tone was steady, but the gravity in it made clear that something irreversible had just happened. The audience exhaled collectively, a wave of shock and quiet satisfaction sweeping the room. As the bailiff escorted Karen out, flashes erupted from the press gallery. Reporters whispered, "This will go viral again." Karen stumbled slightly, whispering to her lawyer, "Tell them to take it down. Tell them I didn't mean it." But even as she said it, she knew the truth. Nothing stays hidden anymore. By the time she reached the hallway, her phone was already vibrating nonstop, notifications, headlines. The clip had hit social media before she even left the courtroom. Karen Carter exposed on live camera, the footage that ended her case. She froze, staring at the screen as one comment stood out from the flood. She called the cameras biased, but the cameras never lied. If you were sitting in that courtroom when the truth was finally revealed, what would you have said to Karen? Drop your thoughts below, because after watching how arrogance meets accountability, every opinion matters. By the next morning, Karen's name had crossed from courtroom scandal to national infamy. Every news outlet had replayed the footage, the uncut video of her arrogance, the whispered mockery the moment she broke. Social media was relentless. Her face, once carefully curated on filtered posts and fake smiles, now lived in every meme, every headline, every trending hashtag. There was no hiding from it anymore. The same public she had tried to charm was now her jury, and their verdict was unanimous. At her apartment, blinds drawn, she scrolled through endless comments with trembling fingers. She got what she deserved. The cameras didn't lie. Karma in high definition. The words stung like paper cuts, small but endless. She tossed her phone aside and covered her face, whispering to herself that it wasn't fair, that people were exaggerating, that no one understood the pressure she'd been under. But deep down, she knew it wasn't exaggeration. It was exposure. Meanwhile, the courtroom team, the very crew she'd accused of bias, was fielding interview requests. The senior cameraman, a soft-spoken man named Luis, stood before a cluster of microphones outside the courthouse. "We just recorded what happened," he said simply. "Our job is to tell the truth. Cameras don't create stories, they capture them." His calm dignity went viral. Thousands shared the clip with the caption, "Respect for the crew who stood firm." Back inside, the plaintiff, the quiet woman Karen had tried to humiliate, received messages of support from strangers around the country. "Thank you for staying calm. You showed grace under fire." Her story was no longer about a dispute over money. It was about dignity surviving arrogance. Karen watched all of it unfold from her couch, her hair unkempt, her voice hoarse from sleepless nights. The footage that once terrified her now looped endlessly on her screen, almost like punishment. She tried to contact the show's producers, demanding they take it down, but her calls went unanswered. No one wanted to be associated with her name anymore. She had gone from guest to ghost. The judge's final statement from the day before echoed in her head. Truth doesn't destroy people. Lies do. For the first time, she felt the full weight of those words. It wasn't the cameras that ruined her. It was her own reflection in them. That night, the network released one final post, a behind-the-scenes message from the crew. The caption read, "To everyone watching, what you see isn't just entertainment. It's accountability." Underneath it, comments poured in. "More truth like this, please. No filters. Just facts." And somewhere in that flood of noise, Karen realized something quietly devastating. The world didn't hate her. It just didn't believe her anymore. Her lies had spoken too loudly for too long, and now, silence was all she had left. Weeks later, the noise began to fade, but the memory of what happened inside that courtroom lingered. The scandal had burned itself out in the media cycle, yet the story lived on, not as gossip, but as a lesson. Karen had vanished from the public eye. Her social accounts wiped, her interviews declined. What remained was the footage, the proof that truth doesn't bend to anyone's comfort. The cameras she once blamed had become something larger than she ever imagined, a mirror for millions watching at home, asking themselves how far people will go to protect a lie. Meanwhile, the show's producers decided to air a final follow-up episode titled, "The Day the Cameras Fought Back." It opened not with Karen's meltdown, but with the quiet dignity of the people she had tried to discredit. The crew, the judge, the plaintiff, all speaking briefly about integrity, about how truth doesn't need a script. The segment went viral again, but this time, it wasn't about humiliation. It was about reflection. In one of the final clips, the judge's voice echoed over slow footage of the courtroom. "Bias isn't what the camera sees. It's what the heart denies." The line struck a chord. Across social platforms, people shared it with a new message. Truth is the footage. Far from the lights and microphones, Karen sat alone in a small cafe on the edge of town, dressed plainly, unnoticed. She stirred her coffee absently, the clinking spoon echoing faintly. A TV mounted in the corner replayed the follow-up special. Her eyes flicked up to the screen just long enough to hear her own name. Then quietly she looked away. The noise that once defined her had turned into silence. A silence she could finally hear. The cameras had captured her fall. But maybe, just maybe, that fall was what she needed to face herself without a lens. She had spent her life performing for attention, but in losing everything, she found something truer than applause: consequence. As the episode ended, the narrator's voice lingered. When the spotlight fades, the truth remains, and sometimes that's the only justice we need. Outside, the evening was still. Karen stepped out of the cafe, the world around her unaware, unbothered. She paused at a window, catching her reflection in the glass, a faint, humbled face staring back. No cameras, no audience, no excuses. For the first time, she didn't look away. If you believe truth doesn't need to shout to be heard, type "truth wins" in the comments. Let the world know you stand for honesty, even when it hurts.